Yes, dear ones. In his autobiography, Pir tells the story of his walking down the streets of Hyderabad, and there was a dervish laughing and crying, and as dervishes do sometimes. And he told every passer-by all about himself in detail, telling all about their problems and why their problems are the way they are and how they could solve them. And so, of course, a lot of people would like to ask how on earth it is possible to do such a thing. The reason for his ability to do that is because he had lost any notion of himself, and therefore he was able to enter into the soul of every being. And most of us, being centered in our consciousness of ourselves and our notion of ourselves, therefore are unable to reach into the souls of other people. So this gives us a clue to intuition. The art of intuition is therefore to offset one's consciousness of one's own person and spread one's consciousness so that it pervades the universe and therefore see things from inside instead of from outside. It seems that there's some kind of interrelatedness between events and situations and people, a sort of inner lining where everything is much more associated and interconnected, as I say, in a kind of state of resonance. And we're used to looking at the surface of things, and as a consequence we can't always see their interconnectedness. Well, what we want to go into this morning is how to develop intuition. Now, we all have a hunch about things that are about to come. We all have an impression from a person which may contradict the impression of the mind. We all are sensitive to atmospheres, sometimes atmospheres of places and so on. Sometimes we ascribe this to some hallucination or imagination or fantasy and so on. And in fact, one of the reasons why we don't use our intuition or trust our intuition altogether is because we're not always sure whether it is fantasy or intuition. And so the great question is, of course, how do we tell whether we are dealing with a genuine intuition or whether it's just the elucubrations of our imagination that's run amok? Well, this is, let's say, the subject of this morning's study. Now, in this connection, I think that Mush gives us a lot of very clear indication as to how to develop intuition. There's, of course, a numberless cases, of course, of Murshid using his intuition. For example, someone came to Murshid and said, asked what they should do, and Murshid said, well, you should work for the message. You could go to a certain city and work for the message. And then that person said, but I couldn't because I'm living with my sister. And so he said, in a few months' time you'll be free. And indeed, in a few months' time, her sister married. This is expressive of the kind of feeling that one has, that the mystic has. A person begins to communicate with all things and all beings. Wherever his glance falls on nature, on characters, he reads their history, he sees their future. So there are two things. Their history, that's the past, and then the future. So we're not just confined to the present. Every person he meets, before he has spoken one word with him, he begins to communicate with his soul, you see. So communication with the soul instead of the mind. A lot of us think that intuition consists in reading the mind. Before he's asked any question, the soul begins to tell its own history. Every person and every object stands before him as an open book. And just remember that when a person knows that you see into his soul, he doesn't try to conceal himself anymore. That's when you can see. So one would, of course, like to know if someone is afraid of one, or someone is against one, or someone is in favor of one, or someone is trying to help one, someone's thinking of one, someone is going against one's wishes, someone is standing for one. All these are things that one can feel at a distance using intuition. A lot of people come, of course, to a teacher and ask him whether he's going to be successful in life or in his particular venture, or whether he's right or not, whether he will be able to pull off a friendship with a person. Also, one receives warning of a coming danger. So very often the teacher feels, or let's say the person who is exercising intuition, has a forewarning of a danger, a premonition, or premonition of a failure, or the promise of a success. And then, of course, life becomes very, very wonderful. One begins to see behind the curtain all the forces that are in play. And Murshid calls this seeing the cause of the cause and the purpose behind the purpose. This is important because, as you know, the other day I was saying that Murshid's teaching is goal-oriented, yes, but at the same time there is also vision of the cause. So there are two things, but of course the purpose is more important than the cause, because what is achieved on the earth is important, and that's where the purpose is fulfilled. The cause is beyond the earth plane, although it starts on the earth plane, but you're moving back from one cause to the other until you get to the original cause. Now, those things that will promote developing intuition are seclusion, silence, thoughtfulness, meditation and gentleness. It makes the rhythm of one's life appropriate to receive inspiration, revelation, communion. Now, the one thing that one has to avoid is, of course, the tendency to devote one's time and thought to other people's affairs, which do not concern one. As I said the other day, that's part of the conversations of so many people. They're talking about the other people's things that happen to other people, just gossip. And you can be sure that the person who gossips does not give himself a chance of developing his intuition. And the second thing is, of course, forming an opinion about a person. Do you think that sages and saints try to see the thoughts of other people? Not at all. That does not concern them. But the thoughts of another person manifest themselves to the saint. So I would say that you only develop intuition if you are worthy of keeping the secret of a person in your heart. If you're going to gossip about it, you will not develop intuition. That's probably one of the reasons why not everybody is given to develop intuition. Imagine what a terrible thing it would be if we became apprentice sorcerers and were able to know all about other people intuitively, and we were indiscreet and would spill it all over the place. We could just do so much harm to people. And Moshe said there's a kind of law so that if you begin to talk about what you see in an indiscriminate way, then of course your light will grow. The light of your intuition will grow dimmer every day. Now, one of the things, of course, that encourages intuition in a person is his strength, his courage to face immensity, because you see, when you see behind the behavior of a person all that is involved in it, and instead of being judgmental about it, you are awed before the vastness of what is implicated in the slightest action in the world. And you have a sense of reverence before all that is involved. In other words, the whole cosmic drama sometimes enacts itself in what seems to be an insignificant act of a person, but that is not. There's no act that is insignificant. Everything's related. And so he says, it's like some people are afraid of standing on a high mountain and looking at the immensity of space. And the reason is because they hold on to their little selves. So the person who develops intuition must be prepared to look at immensity without being shattered. Now, of course, I shouldn't say that altogether, because there's a certain shattering that is necessary in order to be able to progress, but it mustn't reach such a point that one is unable to function. And so imagine what would happen to you if you did know what was intended, or what was, let's say, the mechanism behind the whole universe. You would be so overwhelmed and so shattered that you, as I say, you would be out of circulation altogether. And that's why each one of us, to each one of us is revealed as much as we are able to take according to our degree of evolution. And so if you don't have enough intuition, you can understand that the programming is protecting you against the knowledge that you would not be able to handle. The Sufi therefore is grateful for what he sees and hears, and grateful for what he does not see and does not hear. Now, how do you develop intuition? Well, as soon as intuition springs up, reason, its competitor, rises and says, no, it is not so. And there's a conflict in the mind. If one makes a habit of catching the first intuition and saving it from being destroyed by reason, then intuition is stronger and one can benefit by it. You see, so perhaps one of the first precepts in learning how to develop intuition is to forestall the act of reason that is going to kill it in the bud before it even reaches your conscious mind. You must intuition always starts in the unconscious, that is, at a level which is called the subliminal level, below the conscious threshold, the threshold of consciousness. And so most of the time one is unaware of it. But you know, the threshold of consciousness does shift its position further and further. For example, you can shift it further down into the unconscious, so that you may become conscious of things that normally you are unconscious of. So you can, how can you say, adjust your consciousness in such a way that you are sensitive to very slight impressions which in one's ordinary attunement would not affect one. But as I say, and as Murshid says, of course, normally reason kills these budding flashes of or hunches in the bud, and so that's the moment to protect these intuitions and do not allow your reason to counter them while they're still very delicate and precarious. The reason why reason, of course, is the enemy of intuition is because the intuitions defy our usual way of thinking, because our usual way of thinking, of course, based upon our very narrow notion of ourselves and what I call the vantage point. We're always seeing things from a certain point of view. That's the way things look from our reason. But intuition is not limited by the notion of our personal selves, and consequently one sees things very differently. For example, I'm saying this all the time, and I'm giving darshan, for example. an intuition comes in my mind, and if I were allowed my reason to work, then my reason would say, well, why on earth are you saying this? It's ridiculous. You have no reason to think it. At the same time, so if I followed my reason, it would kill my intuition altogether. The only way to do it is to simply put your reason aside, and the only way of doing that is to question the validity of your reason, to realize that that's one thing that, of course, one didn't do well, a lot of people don't do it now, of course, and certainly one didn't do it in the previous decades. But now people are beginning to realize, scientists, of course, are beginning to realize that the limitations of reason, because it's like Euclidean geometry. It's valid within the middle ranges of understanding, but not beyond these narrow, very average ranges. And that's where intuition comes in. In fact, intuition is knowledge of a nature that surpasses the kind of knowledge that is circumscribed by reason. Now, the other thing that kills intuition is doubts. Now, of course we have doubts because we wonder whether our intuition is real or not. And if one does that, then of course one is never going to develop one's intuition. And on the other hand, of course, how is one to proceed if one just simply gives vent to one's fantasy? One is oneself in error, and one is inducing other people into error. And so it's a very delicate tightrope that one has to know how to walk upon. I think really it boils down to distinguishing between fantasy and imagination. That's where the criterion lies. And you see, because while reason is the way of dealing with the impressions that accrue to us from the physical world, or even from our conversation with people, let's say the data input, as they call it, and reason is the data processing, whereby we coordinate all these impressions into a cohesive and rational whole. Both fantasy and imagination are quite the opposite. They are something that descends from a state of... they are not reactions to the outside world. They, as I say, they're kind of like an inspiration. They descend upon us from above, if one may speak that way. And so then what would be the difference between the two? I think the difference is that imagination, what we call creative imagination, is where the cosmic imagination flows through the vehicle of the individuality without being deflected, without being disformed or being deviated, whereas fantasy is where the creativity of the person has disconnected itself with its source. Perhaps one of the best examples is the difference between a fugue of toccata and fugue of Bach, for example, and some music which I won't try to describe. I'm taking extreme cases, of course. You couldn't change one note in the toccata and fugue. You would feel it. Immediately you would notice there's something wrong. Whereas there's such a thing as a randomness in music. It doesn't... it's not in consonance with the overall cosmic pattern of things. It's like, for example, the waves on the surface of water and the circumvolutions of the brain and the patterns inside the trunk of a tree, all follow certain aesthetic laws which have been actually analyzed, and there's a kind of music of the spheres in the very structure of the cells of the body, certain laws, and it's that same structure that comes through in the music of Bach, for example. But when one starts using one's own fantasy, then there's no end to the randomness, and it scatters, of course, one's consciousness, and doesn't give it a constructive a sense of meaningfulness. And so that's the difference, I think. And it is true that your intuition is imagination. It's the divine imagination that is in consonance with the nature of the universe coming through you. And when you're using your fantasy at random, then of course it's not genuine intuition, and it can belie. You can say something that it doesn't correspond at all to reality. The criterion is sense of authenticity. You find that people with a lot of fantasy sometimes lack depth and lack a great sense of authenticity. Authenticity, that means that a person who's very authentic would never make any compromise with truth. So if you make a compromise with truth, you can say things that that are random, that are your fantasy. And the tremendous concern about truthfulness will check your randomness, so that when you do say something that has not been checked by reason, you know that it is solid, because your sense of authenticity would have pruned it if it had not been given you a deep feeling of reality, of rightness. It's a sense of rightness. As a matter of fact, the musician, for example, has a sense of rightness in what he plays, on the poet and so on. One can be lax about one's sense of rightness, let's say. Now, of course, it's obvious that most of us are active in our thinking, and to develop intuition you have to be receptive instead of active. It's not surprising that this dervish was able to pick up all these things, because he was totally receptive. He lost the notion of himself. But what about us who are active in life? Are we able to have intuition at the same time, you see? And that's the real question. And my answer is yes. And of course Murshid's answer is yes. It's a bit like stereoscopic vision, whether one can have two modulations at the same time. But one thing is certain, and that is that if your mind is occupied with thoughts, then of course you're not in a condition in which you are able to be receptive to impressions, because you're full of your own thoughts. So of course it's much easier if you empty your mind of any thought, and that's one of the methods used in yoga, as a matter of fact, to empty your mind of any thought. That's where you can receive intuition. Now the problem is whether you can. Part of your brain can be active, and part of your brain can be in a receptive state. This is something which, as a matter of fact, the people of transcendental meditation have been working on. First of all, they're trying to coordinate the two hemispheres of the brain, which is very interesting, because the left side is more rational, and the right hemisphere is more intuitive and also plastic. It has a sense of form, and music, and so on. And they produce different waves, and actually one is able to coordinate the waves of both hemispheres. So in any case, one could say, I think, that we're not, of course, we don't know enough about these things, but there are certain parts of the brain which, I say this with some reserve, because in fact in seeing that the whole brain acts as a totality, and you can't say that any part is just totally specialized in a certain function. But still, there's a coordination of the different parts, and there's a balance between them. But what I'm trying to say is that one can produce alpha waves and beta waves at the same time. In other words, you can be active in your thoughts and at the same time receptive, and a lot of people are just active in their thoughts and have put scotch tape on their receptivity, so they're not able to receive impressions. So it's just a further dimension of our being that overcrowns the other dimension of activity, in which you develop in time. You develop the ability of doing that. Now, the thing about it is that one has a tendency to think that one is picking up an impression from outside, because that's how one experiences anything. One experiences the universe as outside oneself. And so when one is working with intuition, one thinks that one is picking up an impression from the person who's over there, you see. And that's what flummoxes one, because in fact the impression is picked up inside. As a matter of fact, if you are putting out your antenna in a certain direction, you're sort of focusing your lens, let's say, in a certain way, you can't be receptive because you're prefiguring the impression by your action. Whereas to be intuitive, you have to be totally receptive and not not influence your receptivity by your action. So a lot of people try to develop intuition by using action, by using their will, and of course it defeats its purpose altogether. So during the war, the Second World War, for some time I was an officer watching, a minesweeping officer, and I was watching German E-boats in the Mediterranean at night, and of course one learns not to simply scan the horizon and try to stare into the dark. One learns to have one's eyesight must be totally neutral. The focus of one's eyesight must be totally neutral. And then all of a sudden you see a kind of shadow in yourself. You don't see it over there, you see it in yourself. And then somehow your eyes adjust to that shadow and look at it and pick it up, you see. Because if you were going to try and focus your glance, you'd never be able to catch the place where that little speck is coming from. You'd just miss it. And that's absolutely typical of intuition. So you look inside. Yes, well, this is something that I've already said. Every imagination is intuition until it has been corrupted by reason, and when the intuition is corrupted by reason, it becomes fantasy. Of course, as soon as we think out what we're picking up, then of course we have given up the spiritual source of inspiration, and you are using an earthly means to establish what belongs to the heaven. Moshe speaks about the two kinds of knowledge. There's the knowledge that accrues from outside, and then there's knowledge that accrues from inside, and that's exactly what I've been talking about. And so one is used to looking at the side which is before one, but the person who develops intuition develops the ability of looking at the side which is within him. He says intuition is a disclosure of your own spirit. For example, if a person who's sitting in front of you is insincere, you can only feel it because there's insincerity in yourself. You become conscious of the insincerity in yourself, and that gives you a clue to the fact that that person is insincere. It's a kind of consonance. So you mustn't look at that person and judge that person. But if you feel insincere when you're talking to that person, then you know that you're picking up something that's in him, but it's because it's in you too. Otherwise you wouldn't be able to pick it up. So the word is it is a disclosure of one's own spirit that unveils all things. You see yourself in all things. So, of course, the kind of things that one wants to know is what makes one fail and what makes one succeed and what gives one happiness, and the false nature of people, and how in the worst person is some good and how in the best person there's some bad to be traced. Now, of course, there are certain things that one can use as an external thing to rest upon, as a kind of support to rest upon. They say that people, clairvoyants are continually using some kind of clue. They're very sensitive to any clue they can pick up from you, and sometimes the features of the face or the way you walk, or there's always some clue that gives you. But that's not intuition, of course. That's cheating, let's say. But still, there used to be quite a science of that. They called it phrenology, or so you can tell something by the walk of a person. If the person is wobbling, or if the person is very stubborn, then you can see it by his walk is a bit rather sort of stiff, and you can see the foolishness of a person, or the crookedness of a person, or if the person is self-conscious. And you can tell by the voice of a person. A harmonious person, of course, has a harmonious voice. And then you can tell by the eyebrows. If they're turning upwards, it denotes egotism and or shrewdness. And the puckering of the lips suggests pleasure, and the twitching of the lips shows a tendency to humor. And the movement of the eyes towards the outer corners denotes a clever brain, and the puffing of the cheeks denotes joy, and the drawing in of the cheeks sorrow. And of course the eyes are very expressive. If the eyes are fixed, it shows perplexity, fear, depression. When the eyes are downcast, there is discouragement, disappointment, upwards indifference, or one is trying to establish a barrier with other people. And when the eyes go right and left, then it is utter confusion. Now you can tell, of course, from graphology, the form of thought, it can go right or left or up and down. The Sufis has a science of Uruj and Nazul, which perhaps I should speak about a little bit. Perhaps it's one of the clues to how to deal with our problems sometimes, because life goes in cycles, like a thought or a project, for example, starts in somehow in the womb of one's consciousness, in the sort of in the cave under the ground, where one has got into the depth, and then at a certain moment it emerges above what one might call the horizontal axis, or the axis, the null place, and then it moves from there up towards a fulfillment. Now that upward motion is called uruj. When one's energy is always on the increase, one is waxing, one's energy is waxing. As one gets closer to the goal, one feels more and more enthused and gets more and more self-confident in achieving one's purpose. And then when it reaches a certain zenith or apex, a maximum, which is called Jalal point. And very often then this is followed by waning, a decrease in energy and in enthusiasm, and the energy then reaches the null point, the zero, the horizontal axis. And then, of course, it can even pass below the zero, so there's a sense of being receptive rather than being active, and then maybe there's a new impulse and one starts afresh. Now, on the other hand, it's very possible that it's a great art to know how to jump from the from the Jalal point, that is the point when one has reached fulfillment, before one is losing one's energy, to jump from there to the next, to another another wave, let's say. You know how I think surfing is probably the art of knowing how to jump from the top of crest of one wave to the next, or if you jump from a springboard into the water, and when you're diving, I think you have to wait until the springboard shoots as high as it can, and then you take advantage of that momentum in order to find yourself propelled, catapulted a little bit higher. So in the same way in life, it's good to know just when you're just about to turn the cape and start losing your energy, and at that moment change your whatever you're doing, your endeavor to start something else. But never allow yourself to fall. And so the mystic is, when I say the mystic, because Murshid is of course speaking in terms of his experience. Like people come to him and say, what should I do? Should I continue this, or should I do something else, or and shall I be successful, or so on. And so these are some of the principles that he was using. When he saw that a person is in the uruj stage, then he would say, of course, pursue it now, you're getting to it now, don't give it up now, you just go on. And if he felt that they were declining, then of course he would either give them something else, advise him to do something else, or then teach them how to just accept this decline, because it's part of life, and it gives you a chance of getting into the depth again, so that you are able to build up energy. You can't always just skip from one crest to another. You might not just have the kind of energy that is necessary in order to do it. These are the kind of things that one has to have in mind all the time, and this is your intuition will tell you that. And as a matter of fact, there's even a very concrete method Murshid uses. Like if your breath is more left-oriented, then he says you are in a Jalali condition. It's a positive condition. If it's right-oriented, then it's the other way around. Like the Ida and Pingala in Kundalini. So he says that actually thought has forms. A thought can be rising, a thought can be horizontal, a thought can descend, a thought can be an oblique, and the thought manifests itself as a kind of vibration. And in fact, it's an idea that is occurring now also in the scientific field, whether there is such a thing as a thought field, and whether there are photons, the particle of the wave of thought. And what's more, you may, of course, notice, take a clue from the expression of the face, as we already said, and the reason why that is at all possible is because he says that the attunement of your being does influence the rush of blood in the arteries, which has an effect on the muscles. It's an interesting view, because here was, a mystic who was trying to find a clue to what scientists are working with now, the way that thought is able to translate itself into mechanical action. The passage from mind to matter. So that he says, of course, nobody can tell a lie to you, because you can see it on his face. But these are clues, and as I said, it's not quite intuition yet. Intuition starts when you begin to feel the atmosphere of a person. So you're not going by the way they walk or their face or anything like that, but something more, much more deep, which is the atmosphere. if the person is afraid, if the person is doubting, if the person is suspecting, if the person is thinking of revenge, or joyful, or cheerful, or courageous, the atmosphere speaks louder than words. Now, Moshe says that you must be very careful when you're using intuition, not to confuse the impression that you are picking up from, or supposed to pick up, from impressions that might be floating in your mind. For example, you might be picking up thoughts of other people. I find that when giving darshan sometimes I have to be very careful. Sometimes it has happened to me to say to one person what I was picking up from another person, and that's really very, very serious. So I don't think I'm doing it anymore, but it's one thing that one has to be able to distinguish, because one is so sensitive to impressions, and of course as a consequence one is picking up impressions from different sources. It's just like a radio set that hasn't been trained. The selectivity is not properly adjusted, so one is picking up another station in addition to the one that one is focused on or modulated on. Now, one of the things that we find in intuition is that we see the past and we see the future. We're going to, when I'm talking about science, probably not today, but perhaps the next time, we're going into the question of time and space. Moshe says something very interesting here. Looking into the past is just like looking deep down from great heights. See, that's what I was always saying when I said if you fly high like an eagle, well then of course what would have seemed to a worm to have been past is still present, of course. So it's like looking deep down, he says, from a height. That is, looking into the past. It means probing the depth of life. Looking into the present is just like observing a wide horizon, as wide as we can see. So, as wide as we can see. In other words, according to the span of your consciousness, your here and now will be just as wide as the span of your consciousness. I said the other day when I said if you were inside a train compartment, your here and now looking out of the window would be limited by the frame, and if you were sitting on the top of the train, your here and now would be much vaster, and it would see into that towards which you're moving, that's in the future, and would see more of the past, that is that which you have left behind. And then looking into the future is like looking upward to the zenith. That's very interesting. And the feeling we experience is different from each of the ways. Yes. You see, the reason for that is because it isn't true that the future is there. What is true is that the archetypes, let us say, are being formed. So looking into the future is not like looking in front of the train and seeing how it's coming, but it's seeing what is being prepared before it has descended to the point when it becomes a material reality. That's looking into the future. In other words, to predict the future, it's not good just to modulate your consciousness into looking into the material future, like what are the events that might materialize, but it's seeing what Ibn Arabi calls the unmanifest. And we must understand that there's much more in the unmanifest than ever manifests. And that's why I always describe that as seeing what would be if it could be what it should be. That means you see what is the possibilities that are there. Whether they materialize or not, that of course depends upon a lot of factors, and one of them is free will, so you can never really predict an event. but you can predict, you can see the possibilities that are present. Now, of course, if you're flying high, you don't see the detail. So there are people who are caught up in the detail, and there are people who are looking at such vast a horizon that they fail to see the detail. And so actually you can't see both at the same time. The conductor of an orchestra may hear the whole orchestra at the same time, and yet he may want to hear one instrument alone to know in how far it is correct. So there are what he calls short-sighted souls and long-sighted souls. Just as there are souls who have short sight and others who have long sight, so there are some who see things at a far distance with the eyes of their mind, but who cannot see what is near them. They have long sight. Then there are others who have short sight. They see all that is near them, but they cannot see further. There are some who can see far beyond or long before events, and there is a person who only sees what is immediately before him and what is next to him. He sees nothing of what is behind him. His influence reaches only as far as the thing that is just beside him, and it is that which influences him. But there is another person who reasons about what he sees. His can be called medium sight. He reasons about it as far as his reason allows. He cannot see beyond his reason. He goes so far and no further. Naturally, if these three persons meet and speak together, each has his own language. It is not surprising if one does not understand the point of view of the other, because each one has his own vision according to which he looks at things. No one can have his own side to another, can give his own side to another person in order to make him see differently. So you remember the example that I gave yesterday about, or day before yesterday, about the star that you might have collapsed many eons of time ago, and you see it now, and that means that, of course, part of it is still living over here, and so the past continues to live. Every word once spoken, once it is spoken, every deed that is done, every sentiment felt is recorded somewhere. It has not gone, it is not lost, we do not see it because it is not always recorded on the surface. And the reason is because the past is working on, and there's we must understand it's not still. It's not like a record that you can put in a museum or something, or like a photographic plate that's standing still. No, it continues to work, but it is to be found. Like, for example, that seed has produced further plants, but you can trace it back because its traces are still there in the universe. So it's not past. Now, here Murshid gives really the real clue to intuition. He says it doesn't come from your personal center of knowledge. It is because you have access to the knowledge of the universe, and that explains why intuition takes place amongst people who have lost their personal consciousness, because that's when they allow the consciousness of the universe to come through. I think this is one of the greatest clues, I think, when he says, whatever we know today is the result of thousands of years of experience. The discovery of the very least thing is the discovery of the whole humanity. The whole of humanity has shared in everything that we think new today. It's very interesting also from scientific point of view. That is really the view of the scientists. It's the holistic view, the holistic view. The whole of humanity has shared in everything that we think new today. And Murshid calls it the universal memory, in other words, the divine mind, where we do not only recollect what we have seen or heard or known, but where we can even touch something we have never learnt or heard or known or seen personally. Divine mind is a stream of the fountain, and each individual mind is just like a drop. But each stream of the fountain is connected with the stem of the fountain. And consequently, Murshid speaks about the storehouse. The storehouse I spoke of above is the subconscious mind. In that storehouse, there are things, and they are alive, and they live. All thoughts and impressions are living things. There is nothing in the mind that dies. It lives, and it lives long, but when we are not conscious of it, it is in our subconscious mind. In other words, we do have access to all this knowledge, and it's not the kind of knowledge that accrues to us through our senses or through our personal mind. It's a kind of collective mind that is, or collective consciousness, not a collective, well, which is stored in the unconscious. So that's really what Jung calls the collective unconscious. But it can be conscious, and then it's a collective conscious and not a collective unconscious. And he pictures the storehouses like this. He says, a person going through a large room where there are all kinds of things exhibited, and yet there is no light except a searchlight in his own hand. And that's Aladdin's lamp. It may be thrown on the past, it may be thrown on the future, it may be thrown upon living beings, it may be thrown on objects, and their nature and secrets are revealed, and may be thrown within oneself, and then the self would be revealed. So that's we, let's say, all the past, and we know that that is true of the DNA structures of ourselves, which record the whole past of the universe, not only of the planet. And in the same way, in our unconscious, we do have the record of the whole past. And it's not just the past, but it's the record of, let's say, the universal mind. That means even the thinking that is programming for the future. It's all there recorded, not recorded. It's there alive. Let's say, in this, what he calls the storehouse is, of course, the collective unconscious, and at any time we can throw a light upon it, and that light is, of course, the light of our personal consciousness. Now, perhaps Murshid says this the best here when he says there's a knowledge which one can perceive with the senses, and then there's a knowledge that one can perceive with the mind alone, and a knowledge which one can realize by the soul. And so I think that most of this teaching is a knowledge of the soul, and so we don't have to say that the mind is the only source of knowledge. There is a knowledge of the soul. Says something that is very interesting. If we reflect that this body and this mind occupy two different planes, then we will understand that there is more limitation on the one than the other. For example, if we want to go to a particular street or place in our body, it will take a certain time. But if we go there with our mind, we can get there in a moment's time. I've often tried to see how we could describe this. Perhaps one of the simplest pictures would be a sieve, or let's say, for example, a coral reef, or a sponge, for example, a sponge. And so you have that physical structure of the sponge, and then you can have water running inside it. So you could imagine the mind and the body like those two different things. They're kind of one flows through the other. They're two planes, but they occupy the same space, if you like, but they're just two different planes, and there's some interconnectedness between the two. Now, this is very important because this is the clue, again, the clue to intuition. You see, man experiences heaven when conscious of his soul, and man experiences the earth when conscious of his body, and man experiences that plane which is between heaven and earth when he is conscious of his mind. So, you see, if you are body conscious, you're conscious of the bodies of people around you. You're conscious of the bodies of the trees and so on. You're conscious of physicalness. If you're conscious at the mind level, you can converse with people. You can your connection is purely at the mental level, and perhaps at the personality level, and maybe also the emotional level. But if you identify yourself with your soul, then that is where you communicate with people at the soul level. And that is where you begin to see their secrets, because you can't see it at the mind level. So intuition is not communicating with people at the mind level. You can't get a clue to what's happening in the depth, just communicating them at the mind level, even though you can reach a person's mind. But it's not good enough. Now this is a thought which, baffles a lot of people, because one is so used to thinking that there are two things. There's consciousness, and then there's the object of consciousness, and consciousness is picking up what accrues to us from outside. And there's a kind of traditional teaching in all the esoteric schools that the consciousness contains in itself knowledge. And I spoke about this, if you remember, I spoke about intelligence, which is beyond the dichotomy between consciousness and object. So maybe we should use the word intelligence instead of consciousness. Maybe there's a confusion there. But there was a whole, school of philosophy. In fact, Berkeley and Hume, the humanists, who believe that we have the structure of reality inside us, and we're projecting it on reality. But and then we assume that the outer world is the reality that we're experiencing, whereas we are experiencing the reality of the structure within ourselves. And now, of course, scientists are beginning to confirm that, but that's again one thing I'll be talking about in the lecture on science. Charles Musset says that when he says, if the model of the scientist is a map of the physical world, the mathematical formula of the mathematician is a map of the mind. And the extraordinary thing is the complete concurrence between those two. So this is then an important thought, that what goes from us to the object is as important as what goes from the object to us. And therefore, it is perfectly true to say that intuition is not just receptive. There's that receptivity, but there is something that goes out from us. Let's say our imagination, our creative imagination, conforms itself to what is being picked up from outside. It's an adequation of those two together. Very difficult to describe that in any other way. Now, Moshe goes further still. It says, for example, you taste the food that you taste in your mouth. Well, that's the first stage. But when it gets digested, then the whole body has a kind of inner taste. He calls the assimilation of the food. It's a deeper taste than the taste of the mouth. And so it's a kind of assessment of the essence behind reality. And it's, if you used to always grasping the essence behind situations and people and so on, that's when you get a clue to their being. Instead of trying to work at the guessing, let's say, their thoughts and their conditions and so on, you get right down to the essence. He says, it does not mean that the seer cannot perceive the mind, but by perceiving the mind he limits his powers. And that's why you must just try and perceive the essence. Now, we come to this view which I think is absolutely in consonance with the holistic view which I'm going to describe in science today, synchronicity. Every condition, I would say that this is like, it could be written by Heisenberg or De Broglie or any of the modern scientists. Every condition has a correspondence, a relation with another condition. Because for a mystic there is no divided life, there is only one life, one being, and one mechanism which is running. And therefore a mechanism is always running in relation to another mechanism. However different and disconnected they may seem, they are not disconnected. And he gives the example of you're walking in the street and you feel very disturbed by something, and there's a cart and horse, those were in the old days of course, and all of a sudden the wheel gets detached from the horse, from the cart. Now, is there connectedness between those two events? You know, that was the question that Jung asked himself, because there were so many coincidences in things, stories that were related to him by his patients, that he began to feel that there must be some interconnectedness between events that seem where you can hardly see how one could have influenced the other. That's the law of synchronicity. And it is that law which the ancients knew about, because, for example, reading a person's fortune by looking at the cards. Now, how is it that the particular card that shows up should in any way be connected with the problems of that person? You know, there's some kind of, and in fact there is a relationship. That's the extraordinary thing about it. That's why some dervishes, for example, look in the smoke, for example, the forms in the smoke, or in crystals. But Moshe says, please do not start indulging in fortune telling. For one thing, because the future is not knowable in advance, and secondly, because there are some times that light is thrust upon you and you see things, and then at another time you may not see things, and people will rely upon you because once you were right, and so they will blindly follow what you said because you happen to, they were able to confirm what you said the last time, but that doesn't follow that this time you will be able to see correctly too. Moshe explains all of these phenomena by the fact that there's you have to distinguish between three things. There's the mechanism, the machine, let's say, that aspect of the universe that is automatized, and then there is the machine within the machine. Now, in those days, there weren't any computers. Now, we wonder whether Moshe had a premonition. A day would come when you would build a computer inside a machine, so you'd have a machine within the machine. And then there's the engineer. And so there are functions that have been set into automatic action, and then there's a kind of finer computing action which programs this automation. And then behind that, of course, there's the divine thinking that is giving a sense of orientation to the programming. Let's say that doing the software work. The practice of the vastness is going to be helpful, because then you open up that vehicle that you are to the tremendous descent of divine consciousness. Now, it is true that one has to do something rather drastic with one's capillaries, let's say, with one's limitation. One has to really... But the fact is that our understanding isn't vast enough to be able to encompass the divine understanding. And so, at a certain time, you have to just really let your understanding be shattered. That's what happened to Al-Hajj when he said, when you have a whiff of the divine understanding,
your understanding is shattered. So that comes when you despair of your understanding because you feel that it's really no good. I found during my retreat that it was a marvelous protection just to, when thoughts came, just to think, well, they're not valid. It's a wonderful protection. It's the easiest way, instead of fighting your thoughts and trying to control your thoughts and so on, just think, well, my thoughts are just, they're stupid. They're not valid. It's a marvelous protection. And when you do that, then all of a sudden your, well, what we call the divine understanding comes through. But you could call it differently. You could say it is the understanding of the eternal part of your being, and that's what we call intuition. It's a knowledge that is not based upon the understanding from outside. So now you're facing your problems, and you dismiss all the solutions. That's not difficult, because there's hardly ever a good solution for a problem. There's always some drawback. And you just cease to try and understand, and look at everything objectively, because the center that is looking at things is totally impersonal. And the problem will look very different. In fact, you'll think, well, maybe it's better that things are the way they are. And at first you thought it's terrible, it's unbearable, and so on. And you think it over and you think, well, it keeps me on my toes. It forces me to develop a lot of, well, there's a lot of suffering involved in it, but maybe I just have to go through the suffering. And I know I would like this, but okay, I can't have it. Well, what I'm trying to say is this. You're in a situation that seemed just unbearable. And you're just hoping that the situation would change, and it doesn't change. But then you change yourself, and you get back into the situation, and you say, well, it's okay, it's okay. It's because you've changed now. Now, the secret of this is to, as Moshe says, is always to see the cause behind the situation and the purpose beyond the situation. This really, you must make a note of that, because this is really very important. When you're facing a problem, the first thing is, what's the cause? Well, I did this, or then that person did that, or then because this happened, and therefore this is happening. There's the cause and the effect. Or then you might go as far as to say, well, it's because of something I did in a previous incarnation, and therefore that's the way things are. That's not solving the problem. That's explaining it, and even explaining it in a very imperfect way. But there is another reason why things are happening, not just because of the cause, but because of what is intended. And now that's much more interesting. That's what you can really work with. So, Moshe always says, see the cause behind the cause and the purpose beyond the purpose. All right, so now.
You develop, of course, a tremendous grasp because of the fact that you never judge a person by his character, for example, his personality. You're always seeing the cause behind it. For example, first of all, there's the reason why that person thinks the way he does, or acts the way he does. And then there's another reason which is beyond that, and that is, of course, the programming that has brought him into that particular framework. Of course, naturally you become sensitive to the faults of people, but on the other hand, it's this kind of person who will react the least to these and overlook these defects. And the reason is because he does not just see the lack, but he sees the cause. Whereas the person who sees the most complains the least. The person who sees the least complains the most. So the ultimate thing that one can say is that the mystic does not, or let's say the seer, the one who has intuition, does not, his intuition can never be confined to a particular event. What he sees is the mechanism, the whole universe working. So he says the mystic enters into the depth of the whole mechanism of the universe. He dives deep into the universal life. He, so to speak, touches the soul of the thought. It's just as by seeing the plant one may get an idea of the root. You see, you're always getting down to the depth, to the root. When one is able to see the works of God, another world is opened before one. Then man does not look at the world as everybody else does, for he begins to see not only the machine going on, but the engineer standing by its side, making the machine work. And now finally, wherever you go, you see an answer. That's Murshid is really revealing what is happening to him. When you've developed intuition to a very large extent, wherever you go, you see an answer to your question. And he sees the, how can I say, the interrelatedness between the question and the answer. There's a stage in the evolution of man's life when every question is answered by the life around him. He may have a living being before him, or be surrounded by nature. He may be awake or asleep, but the answer to this question comes as an echo of the question itself. Just as certain things become an accommodation for the air, turning it into a sound, so everything becomes an accommodation for each thought of the sage, helping it to resound, and in this resonance there is an answer. In point of fact, the answer is contained in the question itself. A question has no existence without an answer. It is man's limited vision that makes him see only the question without the answer. That's the reason why we have questions. It's because of our limitation. If we look in front of ourselves, the answer is before us. If we look behind, the answer is behind. If we look down, the answer awaits us in the sky. If we look, if we look up, the answer awaits us in the sky. And if we look down, the answer is engraved for us on the earth. And if we close our eyes, we will find the answer within ourselves. I've gone well over the time limit.